How do you think about necessities? I mean, out in my part of the world, people are starting to grow gardens, thinking about how they do victory gardens and things like that. And like, again, I'd suggest go to chrismartenson.com. And there's, and I mean, and I don't expect it. Lord knows we can't live on $10,000 a year, but I mean, the point is that there are places out there where you can get ideas about how to think about these kinds of, a different kind of life. Chris Martenson on his chapter 20 gives you a whole framework, a logical kind of set of charts about how to evaluate your situation and what you might do. Oh, and then you can read my book, of course. I mean, Planning for Extraordinary Change. My publisher said, write something that you could give to the next president that would give him a framework for how that he could do policy, build policy in a time of high rates of change. And I tried to make it general so that it's applicable across the board, so it works for families or businesses or whatever it is. But the whole notion is that if this government doesn't start to think differently, fundamentally differently, if they keep doing things the same way they've always done it, in a world that changes and becomes something, I mean, we're going to have really big problems. So what you got to do a mind shift. We need people in the leadership of our government who start to see the world in these kind of different kind of ways. So let me tell you, here's the mechanics of how you think about this kind of stuff. You got big change coming. And the first thing, if you can't see it coming, you're going to get surprised. So you got to have foresight. You got to have some mechanism, some way in which you have some early indications that this is what's coming your way. Because otherwise you're out of time and you're out of money, right? That's the way it works. And then you've got to have innovation. Because this new space that's out here doesn't work like the space where you came from, and so you got to have new ideas, and you got to do things differently. And so you've got to, within an organization, within a government, within your family, whatever the thing, you got to start to figure out how do you get new ideas? How do you do things in a different kind of way? And you have to have resilience. You have to be able to stand a shock and come back and be able to keep doing business, doing what you're going to do. And there are lots of things written about how to do resilience, but that's an important part looking into this world that's coming our way. And then, of course, there's sustainability. You, in fact, have got to, and you folks understand this in spades, you've got to be able to sustain yourself rather than being dependent upon all these extended supply lines that go out and are presumed that are going to increase forever. All of these things work and interact to each other, and the big thing about all of this, if you want 3 words that can encapsulate how you deal with this, it's cooperation and communication and community. This is all about working together. It's all about working together to try to solve problems. Nobody deals with these kinds of problems in this kind of situation by themselves. You do it by working together with them. It's that interconnected and interdependent kind of linkage thing, that networking that's starting to emerge out of all of this. We must essentially become new humans. You see this slide? Remember this? Each one of these new things is a dramatically different thing than the one that preceded it. There is a new organism that shows up each time. And so if we're on one of these legs, one of these jumps in this process, there's a new human being that shows up there. Essentially, if you want to be able to effectively transition from here to there, what we've got to do is become new human beings. We've got to be part of the solution rather than the problem, right? In a sense, I guess, as my friend Peter Russell talks about, what we're on this verge of a kind of a global brain awakening. You can see the net connecting people and the internet, and you've got more and more intelligence and the ability with social networking and other kinds of things. And something's happening that's bigger than all of us. Richard Saul Wurman, who was the inventor of the TED, you ever seen those little TV videos on this wonderful thing on? He says we are moving from an era of either or to and also. Think about that. Instead of seeing ourselves as independent, what we're starting to do is see ourselves as dependent. We're seeing the networked kind of relationship, the interdependent relationship. And that starts to show up. I was in Dubai with a World Economic Forum meeting a couple of months ago, and We had 700 people in this room and from all over the world, and they had a kind of an open mic session at the end with everybody getting a chance to say something about what they thought was important. And just over and over and over again, people said, we have to cooperate, we have to cooperate, we have to cooperate. The only way to deal with the problems that we got is around interdependence and cooperation. That's what it's about. We've got to leverage off of the experience and the wonderful, intelligence that other people have. You can't do this by ourselves. Another way of thinking this is oneness. There's a whole movement. Guys like me, look for these early indicators and these weak signals. And there are a number of disciplines across the world that are starting to move. And sometimes they're called spiritual movements, sometimes other kinds of things, but they kind of are around the rubric of oneness. And there's probably about 50 or 60 million people now in one thing or another that are all starting toward this notion that we're all connected, we're all interdependent in one way or another. And I'll tell you something, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but if you spend any time thinking about it, what you figure out is that if you decide that we're all connected together, and if I hurt you, it hurts me, and so on, it solves all of our problems. All of the big problems in the world kind of go away in terms of interpersonal relationships in your marriage or whatever you call it right now. All of these kinds of things change if you start to see yourselves differently in those kinds of terms. Now that's one piece of what's happening in this thing. In this new world, you're going to get cooperation and other kinds of stuff. There's another piece of what looks to me like what's going to show up in terms of the new human being. When I was a kid, my father had this book called Think and Grow Rich on his bookshelf by Napoleon Hill. And what it said is if you change the way you think about things, reality is going to change. And it said all these kinds of stuff about how you make money. And then along came this guy, Clement Stone, and he built on that. And he said, if you stick a thing on your mirror, on your bathroom, so in the morning you go in there and it says $1 million and it's, a checkbook and you filled in $1 million and it's your name and everything, what that'll start to do is to change the way you see the world and what you do, and you'll reorganize yourself and you'll become a millionaire. And then in the last couple of years, you get The Secret. How many here have seen The Secret? I mean, if anybody, yeah, sure. And they're saying the same thing. So this is not a new idea. It's been around a lot longer than that. But there's this notion. Wait. Now, there's a new, if you go through one of these transitions, there's a brand new human being that shows up there, right? That doesn't operate at all like the one before. And so if you look at it from down below, it just really looks weird. And you say, God, that's stupid, that's crazy, it's nothing. You follow me? It's really, you can't look down below up at that change and say that makes sense because you're not in that space. But here what you see is growing up is these ideas that start to say, and then there's some science that starts to say that your mind shapes your environment, and you can co-create and you can influence the world that comes out of this thing. And then, there's a couple books that have just been published in English from Russian, and he starts to talk you through step by step how you do this manifestation and how you walk through this process of rethinking the way you think the world and how you make things happen. Now let me tell you, this stuff is weird. I mean, for most people, it's kind of weird. And you don't even have to believe this or go here to believe that there's really a lot of change that's coming downstream and you've got to do something differently, and the only way you can get there is to do that. But it's intriguing to think about what kind of a new human being, what kind of a new thing could come through here that could shape this and produce a whole new world for us, because what you need is a whole new world. Now this is an ice Elvis, right? This is an ice sculpture of Elvis. And the notion here is that if we were all made out of ice, and everywhere we looked around, everything was made out of ice, and everything was ice, and some weird guy like me came and said, it's 31 degrees outside, and if we can increase the temperature 1.5 degrees, we'll all turn to water. What would all you ice people say? you'd say you're nuts, you're crazy.